Hello everyone and welcome to Fiction Friday. Today we have episode 21 of The Squire. I hope you enjoy it.
Cole crept through the familiar Corinthian hardwoods, a dozen soldiers, a mix of trained men-at-arms and farmers, following him. They'd followed the trail of a raiding party of beastmen for the better part of the morning, and as noon approached, Cole figured the monsters would stop to rest and eat. He'd left Celestia 2 months ago to return home and begin building a resistance. This lot of men represented the best of the first band he'd assembled. Sure enough, the grunts and snarls of beastmen soon reached them. Cole held a finger up to his lips. The men gathered around him. He pointed to 6, then gestured left. The other 6 he led to the right. Slow and silent, they worked their way closer. Through the branches of a short scrub oak, Cole spotted 15 beastmen, a mix of wolves and boars. They were tearing meat from the dead bodies of 2 women. He grimaced and knocked an arrow. At least the women were dead. Once Cole had seen a group devouring a man before he died. He glanced at his men, making sure everyone had their weapons out and ready. He drew and loosed, his arrow taking a wolfman in the throat. 14 sets of eyes turned his way. The moment they did, the second group hit them from the opposite direction. The beastmen turned to fend off the attack. Cole waited until they'd committed to the first attack, then he dropped his bow, drew his sword, and led his men forward. They hit the beastmen from behind. Cole stabbed and slashed, and in less than a minute all the monsters lay bleeding on the ground. Anyone hurt? One young man had a cut on his chest, a shallow wound that would heal fast. Cole bandaged him up and looked around at the rest of his people. They stood around grinning and talking about their victory. The farmers had come a long way in the month and a half he'd been with them. During the first attack, they'd trembled so they could hardly hold their weapons.
Sir?
Sergeant Smith walked over. Finding the veteran and his men still patrolling Pike's Cove when the sloop the Celestians had loaned him sailed up to the dock had delighted Cole. He spent the first 2 weeks scouting and bringing any survivors back to the little town.
I think they're getting the hang of it,
Smith said. That they are. I'll be heading out tomorrow. Are you ready to resume command? Smith frowned but nodded.
Ready as I'll ever be. Are you sure you need to leave so soon?
I'm afraid so. One resistance cell isn't going to cut it. I hope to repeat what I've done with you and your people at least 10 more times by the end of the year. Until I find a big enough group to build on, I'll send anyone I meet your way.
I like that plan, sir, though I'd feel better if we had at least another 100 fighters to defend the town.
I'd feel better if I had an army of fighters like you and your squad. Let's hope we both get our wish. Gather them up. We need to head back. Smith bellowed orders in his sergeant's voice. Cole winced, hoping there weren't any more beastmen in the vicinity. Smith was a hell of a soldier, but stealth wasn't his strong suit. Smith had the men in order in less than a minute, and they marched back toward the town. One more hot meal and a good night's sleep, then Cole would leave it all behind to start fresh somewhere else. They got back to town before sunset, and Cole smiled at the progress the work crews had made on the palisade. A wall of sharp logs now surrounded the town, and grew thicker and taller every day. It wasn't a castle, but it would give anything short of a small army of beastmen pause. One of the 4 watchtowers they'd planned was up, and the woman on duty waved at them as they approached. Cole waved back. Morale seems good.
Yes, sir.
Smith walked beside him a few feet from the men.
It goes up at about the same pace as the wall. You sure we shouldn't bring back a few heads and spike them for the monsters to see?
Very sure. The last thing you want is a Wolfman scout to see a bunch of his pack mates' heads decorating your wall. He's liable to run back for his friends and attack. Fortification be damned. Better he sees a well-built defensive position with alert sentries. When he runs back to his friends, he'll be more apt to suggest they find an easier target.
Got you, sir. The longer the monsters stay away, the better, far as I'm concerned.
I doubt you'd find anyone to argue with you. Their little column reached the gate, a wagon covered with sharpened stakes they'd rolled into a gap in the wall. A pair of soldiers rolled the wagon aside and saluted as they passed through. Cole and Smith both returned the salute and headed toward the inn. Down by the docks, the boats were arriving with the day's catch, most of which they'd smoke for winter storage. It looked like they were in for a tough winter. Though with their lake access, he suspected Pike's Cove would manage better than a lot of communities, those that survived the beastmen at least. Smith pushed the door to the inn open and Cole followed him inside. The savory scent of fish stew simmering in the kitchen set his mouth watering. The one thing Cole thought he'd miss most when he left was a hot meal at the end of the day. They went to the map in the center of the room and Cole marked the location of their most recent skirmish. It was the second group of scouts they'd killed less than half a day's march from the village. Cole shook his head. It wouldn't be long before the ugly brutes located the town. When they did, he hoped whoever led them wouldn't consider Pike's Cove worth the bother to attack with a large group. Cole had an early supper, then went up to the little room they'd offered him to pack. He wanted to get an early start. When he had all the supplies he could manage loaded into his pack, he took out a small map and tried to figure out where he should head next. He'd scouted the next village east when he first got back and found it burned out and abandoned. Cole considered for a moment, then grinned. He knew the perfect place to check next. Baron Doric's castle was the next logical step. It had a strong position and he knew the people there already, assuming they'd survived the last 2.5 months. He lay back and closed his eyes a moment before he sat back up. He should send Talia an update. Who was he trying to kid? He just wanted to see the beautiful queen's face again. He dug the orb she'd given him out of his pocket and thought of her. A moment later, the orb glowed. Majesty, I've completed training the first resistance group and plan to move on tomorrow. The beastmen are patrolling the area, but I've seen no sign of large troop movements. I'll report again when I have more intelligence. The glow vanished. He waited for a reply, but gave up after a few minutes. She must not have been near the master orb. Cole held the little orb and remembered when Talia gave it to him. Cole walked out into the moonlit garden and found Talia sitting on the bench where they'd first spoken. She slid over to make room for him, and he sat without comment. He still felt a little awkward meeting a married woman like this, but since they only talked, he supposed it was okay. Rain paid me a visit this afternoon. She's nervous about the training, Cole said. Talia looked at him and smiled. The training isn't demanding physically. It requires mental discipline and focus. Do you think she has what it takes? I don't know. Rain's smart and tougher than I expected, but I suppose no one has ever asked her to do something like this. I believe she'll find it a challenge. No doubt. Now, don't you know it's rude to meet a lady and bring up another woman? Laughter danced in her eyes and Cole smiled. Beyond the comfort and ease of palace life, he would miss his visits with Talia the most. Apologies, Majesty. You'll have to forgive this simple commoner's lack of social graces. His tone imitated the snootiest nobles he'd met, and she laughed. Talia leaned into him, and before he could react, she kissed him. Not a friendly kiss, but one that suggested soft sheets and candlelight. Cole broke away. He couldn't go down this path, not with a queen whose husband, loveless marriage or not, would have his head on a pike. What's wrong? Talia snuggled up beside him. Isn't that what you want? What you've been thinking about since that first night when you abandoned me for another woman? In my defense, someone was trying to kill her. Joking aside, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever laid eyes on. You're also a queen, and married. I'm just nobody. Don't say that. Don't ever say that. I've met many mortals in my time on this world, and you're one of the finest. What you accomplished, getting here despite Zaren's best efforts to kill you, is remarkable. I've known men twice your age and experience that couldn't have done it. Take pride in that, and never say you're nothing. She reached into the folds of her robe and brought out a small crystal orb. Take this. It's connected to a larger one in my casting chamber. When you need to make contact, think of me, and when it starts to glow, speak your message. If I'm near, I'll answer at once. But if not, it will glow and grow warm when I send a reply. Cole took the orb and put it in his pocket. Thank you, Talia. Not having you to talk to was the thing I dreaded most. She kissed him again, and this time he didn't argue. Cole left Pike's Cove at sunup. He passed a few fishermen on their way down to the docks. They exchanged nods, but nothing more. He slipped through the gate and headed northwest to the castle. Cole kept to the forest. A single man traveling alone on the roads made too easy a target, whereas moving through the forest wouldn't attract attention. He set an easy pace, stopping once to have a bite of smoked fish before moving on. A couple of hours after noon, he caught a whiff of smoke, stopped and scanned the sky through gaps in the canopy. A thin column of smoke snaked through the blue sky, and he headed toward it. As he got closer to the fire, he realized the road wasn't far off. Who would be stupid enough to build a fire near the road where the beastmen would be certain to find it? The road appeared through gaps in the trees. Not far now. Cole drew his sword and crept closer, every sense alert for threats. He crouched behind a big maple at the edge of the road. Before him, the remains of a fair-sized caravan lay broken and scattered along a 50-foot stretch of road. It looked like 10 wagons and some horsemen serving as guards. Fat lot of good that did them. It seemed clear whatever happened was over and the beastmen gone. Cole left his hiding place and moved closer to examine the aftermath of the battle. Blood soaked the dirt road, and 4 dead boarmen lay in the ditch on the far side, their bodies riddled with arrows. That was what passed for a proper burial among beastmen. He found no human bodies, or animal corpses for that matter. The monsters must have taken them for meat. Of all the horrors the beastmen committed, Cole found the fact that they ate their dead enemies the most distasteful. He found nothing of value among the ruins of the caravan, just smashed personal items and spoiled food. From how scuffed the road looked, Cole figured the beastmen must have numbered close to 100. They headed in the general direction of the castle, and Cole wanted to see where they went, so he slipped back into the forest and jogged along parallel to the road. If the group was as big as he feared, he wouldn't have trouble following them. Night had fallen when Cole caught up with the beastmen. He didn't find as many as he expected, only 20. It looked like more because they'd captured about 50 human prisoners. A group of men, women, and children huddled together as far as their bindings would allow them to get from their captors. Cole shook his head. He'd never heard of beastmen taking prisoners before. The beastmen built fires and sat around eating meat Cole didn't want to examine too closely. He wanted to get close enough to speak with the captives, but with 20 beastmen keeping watch, he didn't dare. Cole slipped away from their camp and found a place to hunker down for the night. He'd follow the beastmen and see what they planned to do with the prisoners. The castle wasn't going anywhere, and this looked too strange not to check out. After a restless night, Cole woke and crept back to check on the beastmen. They'd already moved on, leaving a trail a blind man could follow. He ate a quick breakfast and set out on their trail. He followed them all day, keeping at least a quarter mile back to be certain they didn't wind him. The monsters set a brutal pace. He saw no way the little ones could keep up and feared if they didn't, he'd find some little bodies before midday. Noon came and went without bodies, and Cole sighed in relief. The adults must be carrying them. That would buy a little time, but eventually their strength would give out. Where the hell were the ugly brutes taking them? Cole snuck up to their camp a little after dark. The humans looked more ragged than the night before, and some of the kids had fallen asleep already. Cole clenched his fist. He wanted nothing more than to draw his sword and kill the monsters where they sat. He fought the impulse down. He'd accomplished nothing getting himself killed. When they got where they were going, maybe he'd have a chance to do something.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Fiction Friday. If you liked what you heard, you can find more of my fiction on my website, jamesewisher.com. Please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with anyone else you think might enjoy the show. Until next week, goodbye.